welcome to our webinar about due diligence. A little bit about myself. My name is Harv Allen, and I am the outreach coordinator for the Unmanned Aerial Systems Cluster Initiative. And we are a program that is contracted through the Small Business Administration and is administered by my employer, Development Capital Networks. And our office is located here in Oklahoma City. And as I said, we're one of 7 clusters around the country, and we happen to be the only one that's involved with unmanned aerial systems. And so even though we're in unmanned aerial systems and our region is Oklahoma and Kansas, we still try to spread our wings across the country, and we try to help out entrepreneurs and startups and investors and others who may want to know more about this particular area. And so this is one of the series that we do with webinars throughout the year. And so we're glad that you're here. And so I'd like to introduce for you today our moderator. We have a guest moderator, and his name is Jeff Carpenter. And Jeff is he's a principal for Bird Dog Innovation Strategies, and he provides services in market opportunity assessment. He does some tech scouting, due diligence, patent monetization through his company there at Bird Dog Innovation. And Jeff's experience includes product development for a clean tech startup. He spent several years in university transfer, all kinds of things. And Jeff is also of a company in the travel industry. So if you need a trip plan, you might want to call Jeff if you're talking with him about other things and due diligence, what we're talking about today. I'm sure he would appreciate that. So Jeff, welcome aboard. Hey, Jeff, thank you for being here with us. I'm going to let you, if you want to talk about a little bit about yourself, and then also introduce everybody to the guest panelists today.
Sure. I think you gave plenty of an introduction for me. I'd like to spend our time on the topic, so why don't we go right on to introducing the panel. Okay, the first person that I'd like to have introduce themselves, Peter Adams.
Thanks, Jeff. So Peter Adams, I'm here in Denver, Colorado, and I do a bunch of things that have to do with due diligence. I run the Rockies Venture Club, which is the oldest angel investing group in the U.S., started in the early 80s, been running continuously since then. And then I'm also a general partner of 2 funds, the Rockies Venture Fund and Rockies Impact Fund. In doing all of this, I run a due diligence team of about 12 people who are comprised of PhDs, CFAs, attorneys, and so on. We're doing usually 1 or 2 diligence packages at a time, and we're doing about 20 to 30 different due diligence processes throughout the year and making about 20 investments from those. Also founded the Rockies Venture Institute, which runs the Hyper Accelerator program. It's a 7-day, super fast, intensive venture capital ready accelerator. We've got a due diligence segment on that. And then wrote the Venture Capital for Dummies book, which provided a lot of the content for those programs.
And now, next analyst is John Coligandro.
Oh, hi, guys. My name is John, and I'm president of Intelligent Innovation. Intelligent Innovation works with companies large and small on innovation for growth strategies. We do a lot on the 3 pillars. So we look at your culture, we look at intellectual property strategy, and then we look at the technology area, and we kind of balance all 3. And of course, we get into finance while doing that, and we often help people go through that due diligence process and kind of come out the other side. And I'm excited to be here today, and look forward to the discussion.
Okay, thanks, John. And next is Mark Lee.
Thanks, Jeff. My name is Mark Lee. I'm in Houston, Texas. I'm an angel investor with the Houston Angel Network. I have been an angel investor for almost a year now, so I'm relatively new to it. And so my perspective on due diligence is relatively fresh. You can ask me questions about what you might be doing as a startup and as an angel investor. Prior to my angel investment work, I worked as an executive in large chemical companies for the last 20 years. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
John and Peter. maybe take just a few moments to talk about your books, John? Yep.
I'll just take a moment. It's my second book. The first book was called Intelligent Innovation, and that's the name of the company. That was a little bit technical, and it brought you from really the napkin sketch all the way through being on a product shelf or anything, a ship, airplane, telephone, it didn't matter. This book's a little bit different. It's a little lighter, a lot funner to read. It's something you might grab on an airplane trip and finish before you got off the airplane. But it talks quite a bit to strategy and how to strategize your sales and marketing of a new product. And it can also be a service. It can be a nonprofit. And it gets into even what to do once you have the profits, how to reinvest retained earnings. And there are two sections, of course, on intellectual property. And from there, actually, there is some information on due diligence.
Right. Peter?
I'll just say there are a ton of fishing analogies for venture capital. I just can't even go into all of them now, but it's a good idea for a book. So the Venture Capital for Dummies book, it's written for entrepreneurs. Some people think, oh, this is how to start your venture fund. And of course, there's information that would be useful if you're from the investor point of view, but it's really written for how to present yourself to venture capitalists and angel investors. And it touches on a lot of the topics that people need to know. Things like how to value your business, how to put together a great pitch deck and present, how to network and think about the personal soft side of creating relationships with investors and realizing it's not just all about spreadsheets. And then we've got things on exit strategies, for example, which are super important. And there's a lot of tools and things that you can use to help you, get really ready for venture capital and understand how it works. And of course, the Dummies book format, they make you write these books in like 4 months. So it's light and pretty quick read to get through it.
So question one, we'll start with maybe Peter take a crack at this one. How does due diligence result in underappreciated benefits to entrepreneurs above and beyond the possibility of receiving investment at the end?
So I'll tell you that a lot of people who go through our due diligence process at the end go, that was amazing. It was a lot of fun. And this is not what you often hear from people who are going through due diligence. A lot of entrepreneurs think of it as a necessary evil, as the question implies. I got to go through this pain in the ass to get my check at the end of the process. But it's much more valuable to think of it as having lots of free consulting and smart people really honing in on your strategy, asking the tough questions and sharpening where you're going to go. There's research that came out of Willamette University that shows that when 40 hours or more of due diligence occurs, the returns to investors is as much as 5x greater than what I call beer in a check or coffee in a check investors who just sort of have one meeting and then invest. And I think the reason for that is not that the people who do due diligence find more bad stuff and then they don't invest in bad companies, but rather they take pretty good companies. And by going through this, fairly detailed process of understanding all of the strategies and how they're going to go to market and capital stack and tranching and all of these various things that come up in the due diligence process, they're actually really more ready to accelerate once they get that money. And the way I think of what happens when somebody receives the angel or venture capital investment is they're moving along the road at 20 miles an hour, sort of school district pace, and that money makes them go at 100 miles an hour. And if you think about it, if you haven't gone through this diligence process or you haven't totally sharpened up all of your strategies, if maybe you're saying, well, these could be our customers or these could be, it's like having your wheels out of alignment on your car. And so going through the due diligence process, think of it as tightening up so that when you do accelerate and put that gas pedal down, you'll go straight and in the direction you need to go, better path to success.
Okay, thanks. One thing I would just mention is that a lot of times, especially with angel investors, those angels have been through the process. They're successful entrepreneurs. So the questions they ask you are the ones that they know need to be asked to be as successful as possible. Question two for you. What advice on due diligence preparation would you give to an entrepreneur? And also, to angel investors?
So one of the first things that comes to mind on advice of preparation, I'm a big proponent of dry run and reaching out to the people you're going to be meeting with early on while it's still in draft format and saying, hey, am I getting close to what you're going to be looking for? And make a little bit of the sausage before you have the big day. And that way, it really does two things. One is it sets expectations, but also it builds the relationship. And really, a lot of this funding ultimately gets to relationships. These people will be with you for years. Sometimes, many times, they have advice that you need to hear or skill sets that need to come onto your team. And so the earlier you start that in the due diligence preparation, the better.
Peter, anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I actually think preparation is one of the most important parts of due diligence from the entrepreneur's point of view. And it should not be a surprise what the due diligence process looks like. I mean, investors are going to look into extreme detail on all of your plans, your articles of incorporation, bylaws, all of the detailed stuff. And you can die a death of 1,000 paper cuts if you aren't ready for due diligence, because you get an email, it'll ask you for 3 things, and then you go back to running your business and talking to customers, and then you get another email asking for 10 things, and then you got to drop everything and get that. And then it turns out you need to get a vesting schedule with your attorneys. So you set up an appointment for that, and 2 weeks later you've got that done. And then turns out your pro forma is not good, so you've got to get a fractional CFO and work with them for 2 weeks on it. The next thing you know, you've dragged this diligence process out, which should have just been a little while, because you weren't ready and you're having to go find this stuff. And now it's taking a lot longer. And what happens, especially with angels, is they will go off and chase something shinier. I mean, it is like cat herding. And they're like little kittens chasing little things. And if you don't totally capture their attention and have things all ready, then you're at a disadvantage. We have 2 handouts for you. If you look on the right-hand side of your screen, it says there's these 2 handouts. You can download those. And I think Harv will also give another link for it later on. But one of them is a checklist of all the documents that you would need to have prepared for due diligence. And some of these would be a surprise, like husband and wife or father-daughter relationships. You just want to have a memo in there just describing these things so that they don't come up as a surprise for investors either. So showing full transparency is important. So looking at these checklists, getting all of your documents in a row and putting them into a Google Drive or Dropbox or Lightserv or whatever you like, it makes you look so professional when somebody asks you for one piece of information. You can say, oh, great, here's a link to the whole drive, and you can see all of our stuff, open kimono. We're going to be a good profile company for you.
Okay, question 3. How long should due diligence take, and is there anything the entrepreneurs can do to speed up the process? Peter?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I will say that new investors tend to be either too short or too long in due diligence. They, just try to get it done, and they look quickly at something and get excited by the entrepreneur, and that's too short. They really haven't looked at things deeply enough, or maybe they might just present endless series of questions and drive the entrepreneur to distraction. So there is a sweet spot in there, and I think it's important for investors to be conscious of the burden that doing due diligence puts on an entrepreneur who's understaffed and really trying to accomplish an awful lot. But the entrepreneurs need to realize that the investors really need to go through this process as well, and it does make a huge difference in the outcome of their portfolios. I have one VC who I've met who says that his strategy after meeting an entrepreneur for the first time is what he calls shits. Show high interest, then stall. And it sounds weird at first, but it's actually a process that a lot of VCs and investors use. And the reason they do that is they want to show the high interest because they want you to come back. Maybe most people approach VCs too early, which is actually good. It's important to create those relationships. But the stall part is important because at that first meeting, you set the benchmarks of what you want to accomplish. And then if you meet with that VC again 3 months or 6 months later, then they can compare what you said you were going to do over the next 6 months with what you actually did. And since execution risk is one of the biggest risks facing startups, this is part of due diligence, and it is a really long part because it takes 6 months. So the important thing is to realize there are phases to due diligence, and creating relationships 6 months or so before you actually want to formally start your raise process is a great idea, because that allows that process to percolate and allows you to set those goals that you think you can meet or achieve in the amount of time. And then once you move into formal due diligence, that will be quicker. In my estimation, most people take somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks to do the formal part of the due diligence process.
Okay, just kind of building on that, how much time should somebody assume at a minimum it's going to take them from when they start to when they have a check?
I would give at least 6 months for that. And there's a lot of factors that go into it. Part is how well prepared you are. Part is what time of year it is. It's tough to raise money. I've just seen in July, June, first part of August. And then the other is how you price your deal and how you structure it. So all of those things will impact how long it takes. But I would budget at least 6 months, maybe 9 months for doing the deal all the way to close.
Okay. John, do you have anything to add to that?
I would ditto most of that. I did just guide a client through a deal which in light speed closed in about 3 weeks. It was for a very large amount. But if you really look at what the couple did, they had prepared for 2 years. And they were so well prepared, which really says a lot of what Peter's saying. They were so well prepared. Their prototypes were at an extremely high level of refinement. They had websites. They had marketing studies. They had won a design award. So when they went to the funding people, most of it was so well polished that it went through very, very fast.
Okay.
But if you count all that production before it, it really was years.
Okay. And Mark, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I've been involved in due diligences that have taken 4 or 5 months, which should have probably only taken a couple of weeks, and then some others that have been done relatively quickly. I think it depends on the level to which the entrepreneur is prepared, as well as the amount of information that the investors are trying to acquire, and the level of difficulty in getting that information, their level of expertise. So I think it's a pretty broad range, and the size of the deal didn't seem to make any difference. It really had to do with what was available out there in the information that was exchanged.
Point, by the way, that Mark just made, it's a misunderstanding with a lot of entrepreneurs. They think, oh, if I raise less, it will take me less time. But sometimes raising less actually presents greater risk because you're not raising enough to get to the milestones you need to for your follow-on raise, and it can actually scare investors away. We just closed a $15 million round in probably 2 months. And, so that's giant round, by any angel investing standard. And, that was a pretty quick raise. But once again, they were really prepared. And, if they had raised less, it might have actually taken longer because they wouldn't have had enough to accomplish their goals.
Okay. Question 4, Mark. What is the output of due diligence? And I guess more specifically, what is received by the angel investors to guide their investment decisions? And then what, if anything, from the due diligence process is received by the entrepreneurs?
Well, I think most angel investors want to have the checklist completed. So they've prepared a checklist that's pretty thorough regarding all the various aspects of the deal that's out there and what the business is. I think probably one of the most telling outputs from the due diligence process is also that relationship with the entrepreneur, whether it's just with the CEO or more thoroughly with their team. And sometimes that relationship development can be the biggest advantage for both the entrepreneur and the investor, just because you might like the idea and like the concept of the deal. Getting that relationship developed is really important. for future exchange. I think building on that, for the entrepreneur, they should also feel that they have somebody to turn to that's providing them with what we call smart money. In other words, an investor who has something to offer, whether it's contacts or within the investment community, in order to continue the raise, or in the area where the the entrepreneur is trying to sell their product with potential customers or potential suppliers. And so I think out of all of the detailed data that you exchange, that relationship is oftentimes the most valuable output of the due diligence process.
Okay, thanks. Peter or John, anything to add to that?
Well, I'll just talk about the documentation part of due diligence. And this varies tremendously from investor to investor. VCs will typically never share their investment notes with you. But it's very common for angels, especially those who invest in groups, with, maybe who are part of the Angel Capital Association, which Houston Angel Network and Rockies Venture Club are both members of. We syndicate well over 50% of our deals. And part of syndication means you've got to go through this whole process as a group, here in Colorado with our 5 chapters, and then you've got to bring somebody else up to speed. And the way to do that is having documentation that's professional and well written, covers all the key segments, the team, the market, the product, the competition, the finances, the exit strategy, the legal landscape, the valuation, all of those things, so that another angel group can come up to speed more quickly. And this is how syndication works. So if you think about it, the surveys show that the average angel group only writes a check of about $250,000. And yet the average raise is maybe $750,000 to $1 million. So this means most entrepreneurs are going to be going through some sort of a syndication process, which may be structured and led by a local angel group or micro VC, or it may be that the entrepreneur is forced to sort of learn the ropes and develop their own network and just be pitching over and over again. If you can get the documented due diligence package and share that with other people, it will facilitate raising the money. One other benefit of having a documented diligence package is, much as I hate to say it, investors don't always get it right. And we have a sort of a review process before we release a due diligence document where it goes back to the entrepreneur for fact check. And it's kind of scary. There's always 2 or 3 things we've missed or didn't quite get right or whatever. And it's nice to give the entrepreneur the chance to make sure that when these facts are being presented to others, that they're actually true.
So question 5, how does syndication impact due diligence? This is certainly following on from where Peter was already talking. And should a lead versus follow preference on the part of a given investor impact where an entrepreneur submits their deal?
Wow. Yeah, I'll answer this from the soft side, which I actually really believe in. And that is the side both Mark and Peter have mentioned relationships. And I think the syndication gets you right again to building a team around you. Some of that team may be extended. They may be on the outer parts of your circle and you won't see them every day or even every month. But they have contacts. One of the main reasons companies fail is often in the area of distribution and getting your product distributed. It's very complicated. It gets more and more complicated every day. Believe it or not, Amazon is not the only people who distribute products. So, there's someone in that group, that extended syndicated group, that will be able to help you, and you have to reach them. And that really gets to the second one. And I believe, again, on the softer side, that you have to be comfortable with the people investing in you. So the lead versus follow thing, whoever you're going to sign up to, you have to understand this person is going to be part of your family. And maybe for a short period of time, maybe for a long period of time, they are going to be an advocate for you. And so you want to believe in them and have them believe in you, and that will get you to the lead versus follow.
Okay. And Mark, did you have anything to add to that? Or Peter?
Yeah, on the lead investor choice, it's almost as if it happens, at least in what I've observed, happens by default with the investor that ends up being the most interested and that you develop, like John said, the best relationship with. Because this is somebody who's going to be with you for a long period of time. And it doesn't mean that that lead investor is going to be the largest investor either, although that may be the case. Sometimes it's at least in the angel networks, it's the person who is interested, willing to invest, and invest the time, has the time to work with you, and maybe that you just get have a good relationship with, that will be the advocate for the company, trying to make sure that you meet the right people in different organizations, and that you have access to other investors that'll be able to provide you with the support that you need.
I agree with all of those points, and I'll add that some people naturally are willing to lead, or some groups are willing to lead, and others identify themselves as follow-only groups who don't do due diligence. And so you want to identify where one of those people fall. There is a little bit of a two-edged sword on this, that if you go, like if somebody was in Houston and went to Houston Angel Network, or did not go to Houston Angel Network, they came to me first, I would say, you go to those guys, and the local people are always going to be the appropriate people to do due diligence. They may not like the deal, however, and then now you're at a disadvantage if you can't get a local lead to do that. The typical structure is you get a local lead, and then that person, both Mark and John, use the word advocate, and this is really important. They will advocate for the entrepreneur to these other angel groups. So they're kind of giving the pitch in the background. So making it easy for them to do that is super important. And I guess one other part of syndication is being a lead on AngelList, for example, or a platform, and that the person who leads, if they do take it to that level, then they are expected to write up a diligence summary and present that to other angels who might see it on the platform.
Okay, Peter, maybe you can start on this one. What is the impact of uncertainty in the deal, and how do you keep your eye on the most important aspects of the deal? I think John will also have a comment on this one.
Yeah. So when we start a diligence process, we'll have a strategic kickoff meeting as KO, and this meeting involves all of the diligence team, involves the lead investor, and one of the main things that we do in this meeting is to identify the three biggest risks, because every deal has hair on it in some fashion. It's got something that's scary, and if you don't start out with that focus, there are literally an infinite number of things that you can dive into and start researching in due diligence. And without that identification, what you end up with is a fairly boring, analyst report that talks about the industry ad infinitum. But if you can talk about the scary things and dig deeply into those, it may be about contracts or partnerships or IP, or it's different for every deal. But I think sort of getting that focus allows the diligence team to focus in on what's important, even though as they go through the process, they may identify other things that are even more important. And I'll turn this question upside down and say, look at it a different way. One of the key things that we're looking for, you'll hear every investor say the team is most important. But one of the characteristics of a CEO that I really appreciate is a CEO who's able to understand and handle and control uncertainty. So when a CEO says to me, "Oh, we don't know what our next round is because we're just going to figure that out as we go," or "We're just starting our company, so we can't think about exits at this point," or "Nobody can come up with a valuation for a pre-revenue company. That's impossible, so we're just doing a safe note of the $10 million cap." Those are all sorts of ways of abdicating on decision making or planning or creating the future, and it's just sort of letting the future wash over them. And that is a characteristic of a poor CEO. So a CEO who grasps and controls uncertainty is one that I'm very interested in investing in.
Okay, before moving on, I'd like to go to a couple of questions brought up by attendees. So anybody can address this. How has technology or the internet impacted due diligence?
I think that just like anything else, the internet's made information a lot more available. So, I mean, it seems pretty straightforward that, you've got the availability of checklists and things like that you can look at online and come up with a bunch of different lists of due diligence questions to ask. And then you can do a lot of it on your own and work with the entrepreneur to set that up. So I think it gives you a lot more things to look at in terms of getting due diligence accomplished.
I don't know how people did diligence before the internet. I mean, of course, everything moves faster now, but finding competition, going to Crunchbase and seeing who else has raised how much. A lot of times entrepreneurs only look at the big incumbents when they think about competition, but then there's 24 people doing exactly what they're doing. So going to a place like Crunchbase or PitchBook and seeing those people and how much they're raising gives you great information. And there's tons of resources, things like the Edgar, SEC's Edgar database. You can find all sorts of things about exits, who's acquiring whom, and deep information there. And you find out what the real problems are and if this is the real deal or not. So that's the first place I go for absolutely everything.
Okay, so question 7, Mark, you can start on this. How does valuation enter into the due diligence process?
Well, I think it first of all is determined on the status of the fundraising round. So if you're just getting started with a group of investors, I think your valuation process is an integral part of your due diligence. It requires that both the entrepreneur and the investors kind of have a similar view of at least the general valuation of the company. But it should also be considered that a term sheet that gets developed is not just about the value of the company, especially with most of the things that we're involved with on an angel basis. A lot of these companies are pre-revenue. They don't know what the valuation is, so we end up choosing a convertible note with a cap on it so that we can move around the valuation process and get to more important issues, which is what the company is going to do, who the people are involved, and how that might work moving forward. I think as you move on in different rounds and move beyond that seed round, valuation becomes a lot more important. Once you set a price and start moving towards equity instead of debt financing, it makes a bigger difference, and it's a lot more important to both the founders and the investors.
Okay, and Peter, do you have anything to add on that?
Well, a couple things. You're sort of addressing the valuation all the way through. If you think about the things that create value, those are the things we look at in due diligence. How big the market is, the competition, team, all of those things. But at the beginning, we just had a company. I'll just tell a story. Last month, they were applying to pitch at our Summer Pitch Fest event in August, and it was a cybersecurity company. And we've invested in 3 cybersecurity companies in the last year. And, like one of them had, $2-3 million in revenues. And, they had Homeland Security and Macy's and American Express, all as clients, and their valuation in the first round was about 6.3 million. So most of these were like 6 to 8 million. And these guys came in, not even beta users and no revenues. And they said that their valuation was 20 million. And the way that impacted due diligence is we never got to due diligence. I said, well, how did you come up with that number? And they came back with an email the next day and said, well, how about 10 million? And I'm like, well, I'm a master negotiator to just save $10 million in one email, but I still didn't feel comfortable about that. It seemed high. So they should have said, we have no idea, we're working on that, rather than to, wing it and come up with a 20 million and then $10 million number. And, they should be looking at the competition, looking on all of the other companies who are at their stage and how much they're doing to set that valuation. And then anyway, at the end of the due diligence process is where we do our formal valuation process. And regardless of if we're doing a note or equity, we'll go ahead and do 5 different valuation methodologies, looking at the value question from different angles, and then we'll come up with an aggregate valuation. And we believe when we are doing a convertible note, which we frankly try to avoid whenever we can, our method of coming up with what the valuation cap should be is exactly the same process as we use when we come up with an equity valuation. So we think most of the time it's going to convert at the cap anyway, so that's what we're going to pay. And so we'll be setting that in the same way that we would set an equity valuation.
John, I think you could take a first crack at this. How should entrepreneurs and angels approach the pre-diligence deal submission and deal screening to make sure that only highly relevant and promising deals enter the time-consuming due diligence process?
That's a great question. I'm going to answer it from a little bit of a different angle, and I'm sure Peter and Mark will weigh in. I'm going to go back to some comments Peter made on risk and a little bit of what Mark said on projections. And I think the way you pre-sift these things is understanding the risk profile and whether or not those projections that are impacting valuation are reasonable. I think is a word Mark used. Are you in the same ballpark? And one of the things I always kind of insist my clients work on is a roadmap. And the roadmap takes your IP or takes your idea and watches it mature through phases. Once you have 2 or 3 or 4 phases going out a few years, now the investor can feel comfortable that you have a plan, that you have something today and something tomorrow and something the day after. What's really interesting about that is you can associate a risk profile or a risk quotient to each phase. And then, if you're going to do that, you can look at the inverse risk, or the opportunity. So what is the risk of not doing phase 1 or not doing phase 2? When you do that from both directions, so one is top down and one is bottom up, you really start to understand the company. You start to understand what you're essentially what you're going to do for 5 or 10 years. Some of the angels and investors I'm dealing with won't even entertain a company unless they have a roadmap like that. And a roadmap with a risk quotient is just even that much richer, that much better. So we do a lot of that, and looking at both the risk side and the opportunity side, and then putting those things into your projections and coming up with a value for your company.
And Mark and Peter, do you have anything to add? And specifically, one angle that I'm kind of interested in is how does an entrepreneur sort of think about, am I ready? Or if I submit this, is it actually going to backfire? And I'm not going to be able to get my hometown Houston, and not only that, but I won't be able to get anybody because I couldn't get them. So if you have any thoughts on like that preparation or what they should be thinking about before they come in.
Yeah, sure. I think that an entrepreneur, building on that, Jeff, has to understand what their fundraising expectations are from an angel network. What Peter mentioned, a typical angel deal from one group is maybe $250,000. That means on the average angel investment of $25,000 to $50,000. That means you have to have 10 people within that network that are interested in your company. And Houston, we have 100 people in the network, and you might present to 30 at a time. So that's a pretty big crowd, and you have to generate that sort of interest. So understand that sort of fundraising process takes some time. And so you need to understand that you've got to build that rapport with the investment community and continue to pitch and pitch and pitch your deal until you get that number that you need. And your expectations have to be a little bit different. You're not going to find one investor who invests $500,000 in your company, more than likely. It's going to be a number of people that have a smaller amount of money. And that was one of the things that surprised me when I first started learning about angels. It's not just these guys who are dropping $1 million on a startup company once a year, 5 times a year. It's really smaller investments that are kind of built on a crowd basis. So I'll invest because Peter thinks it's a good idea, and he and I have talked about it. We go back and forth on what the drawbacks and the strengths of the business plan might be, and then we decide to invest together. I think that's really important from the entrepreneur's perspective. Just quickly on the angel process, one of the things I've worked on over the last year is trying to understand what my expectations are when I go through deals, so that I'm not wasting the entrepreneur's time. So, for example, if there's an investment that I don't think is going to pay out for 20 years because of some regulatory issue, or the technology is really in its infancy, or there is some other requirement that's going to take some step change in the market, I may not invest in that because I'm looking for returns that are, say, 7 years out. And understanding what your expectations are from an investment point of view is also really important, so I don't waste somebody's time asking a bunch of questions about their business when really the expectation to perform isn't part of what they're capable of doing.
Okay. And Peter, did you have anything to add to that, or should we to the next?
Yeah, just one sort of statistic that is a little bit scary about this pre-diligence deal submission part. This is where companies are getting weeded out at the highest rate. So we're seeing well over 1,000 deals a year at Rockies Venture Club, and we're pitching actually more than the average angel group. We pitch about 75 per year at our various conferences and events. And then from that, we'll go into diligence in 20 to 30, and then invest in, around 20. So you can see that funnel narrows down really fast at that first screening part. So, if you don't have ducks in a row for that, you're kind of out at square one. I think of the diligence process almost like, you go to your grandmother's house, she's got that little maze thing. At least my grandmother had this, that you a little ball that goes around the maze, and then it falls through the hole, at some point. And that's like falling through hole number one. And you don't get a chance to go to hole number two if you don't get through that screening. So thinking about every step of this along the way is super important. And you can research the people to whom you are applying to pitch. Go to their website. You don't want to go to the LSA network and show them a blockchain deal, because LSA network is the life science angels. You want to show them, a healthcare or a drug or device or something like that. So understanding what the criteria are and what the group looks for will help you in that significantly. And then, of course, can't stress this enough. If you apply to pitch and then you pitch, you should assume that diligence is going to start right after that. And so before you even apply to pitch, you should have your diligence ducks in a row.
This actually extends a little bit from what you were just saying, Peter. So question 9, should entrepreneurs conduct their own due diligence into prospective investors? I suppose the answer to that is clearly yes, but perhaps elaborate. So Peter, do you have anything to add just based on what you were saying just now?
Sure. So it's super important. And it was interesting. Yesterday, I met with a CEO who I was interested in investing in. And I appreciated actually that in this interview, I asked him a lot of questions about his company, but he asked me a couple of questions back. What are my intentions with this investment? Am I going to want a quick exit? Am I going to be forcing him to do something he doesn't want to do? He also asked me, he's going on to raise a $10 or $15 million round, and he asked me if I had any connections I could make to upper stage VCs. And so I appreciated that he was thinking ahead and asking what I brought other than just a check. So that's sort of on the positive side. You have the smart money, dumb money, continuum. So you want, obviously the more smart money you can get where people contribute connections or advice or whatever, that's a good thing. There is dumb money and there's dumb active money, and that is what you want to be aware of also. I talked to a different CEO last night who had an angel come in, and he spent like a half a day asking all kinds of questions. And ultimately the CEO said, tell you what, I've just done diligence on you and figured out you're not somebody I want to be in a relationship. You don't need your money. You're going to be sort of always bothering me with this type of question. So he politely said, thanks, but no thanks. And I think that was a super smart decision. And it's really a hard one to do. One other case, there was an investor who had sort of a quid pro quo where he demanded that he become the CEO. Said, I'm writing he's and by the way, I agree with Mark. Most people write $25,000, $50,000 checks. This guy was going to write an $800,000 check, and he said, "And I want to be CEO." And my advice to the founder was run from this guy. I'd met with him, and it was just a toxic deal from the start and would destroy the company. So all of those stories are about it's just as important for entrepreneurs to be looking into the investors and making sure this is going to be a good relationship. It's easier to get out of marriage than it is to get out of an equity investment.
Just two words to that, and it's the same thing as if I see a young couple maybe wanting to date. I ask, are you going the same speed? So the entrepreneur and the investor have the same expectations for speed, and speed and fit. Do your personalities fit? Personality doesn't have to be actually about the person. It can be about all those other things we've discussed today. But speed and fit are huge, which if they're not there, like Peter just said, get out.
Okay, let me go to a question by one of the attendees. How do you handle disagreements with the company on information found in the due diligence process?
Well, it's not uncommon to have disagreements, and sometimes it's just a matter of clarification. But I will say that sometimes the entrepreneur doesn't know something. You see the competitive matrix, and you start doing due diligence, and you find 5 additional giant competitors or people who are nipping at their heels coming up from behind, and you bring those to the entrepreneur's attention. Our goal is always to be totally transparent. That's a key value, I think, for a good investor. And you just, instead of saying, "Oh, they didn't know about these 3 competitors," sometimes they're irrelevant, even though they may look like a scary thing to the investor. So just having that conversation and watching how the team reacts to either new information or information they knew but had discounted as being irrelevant. But I think that just sort of having the conversation is what's important. Ultimately, you don't have to come to agreement on everything. When there is a disagreement, you are still making the invest, go, no go decision. And sometimes when you have a serious disagreement on something that's fundamental, it just turns it into a no-go investment decision.
Okay.
Yeah, I think disagreements are a great opportunity to get to know each other better. So, for example, I worked with one company that we had a discussion about their go-to-market strategy. They wanted to go one route, and I said, "Well, that's not how your type of product gets sold into the marketplace." And we disagreed about it, but we started talking about it, and they did some investigation and found that maybe there is a way that they could take their product through that path, but more often than not, it's done a different way. And so they learned a little bit. I learned a little bit, and we talked about how to resolve that because from an investor point of view, you also want to understand that your CEO and your founders are not so narrow-minded that they believe everything they do is absolutely right, that they can't be coached and can't take constructive criticism in the right way. So it's a huge opportunity to kind of build that relationship and get an understanding of each other as well.
Okay. And I have one last question. It's really a combination of 2. And we only have a couple of minutes, so if you've got a quick thought on this, that would be great. First, how much equity should an entrepreneur be expected to give up to get funding? His second question, can you give some examples of how due diligence process impacted or changed the formal valuation?
I'll give a really quick one, and hopefully Mark and Peter can add on. The deal, one of the deals I just did was 25%, and that fell really within everyone's comfort level. But the moment that deal was signed, the value of the company, in my opinion, doubled because the management team that the VC brought to that table was stellar.
I'll say the average in the United States is 23.5% is what's given up. So, John, you're right on, with that. It has been going down, actually, as an average over the last few years. So there's a trend in the industry. We don't actually care what the percentage is so much. Sometimes we're small players in a very large deal. But the other thing that entrepreneurs should be thinking about is their capital strategy and how much they're raising. some people come to us and say, well, we need $3 million to get through this whole thing. And then we work with them to break that into tranches to minimize their dilution as they go through. So that's why this 25% is a good number. It allows people to raise enough on average to go for 12 to 24 months of runway and build traction so that they can make their next raise while minimizing dilution.
It looks like we're out of time. So Harv?
Well, I'd just like to, first of all, thank you, Jeff, for serving as the guest moderator today. You did a terrific job. And thank you to our guest panelists today, Peter Adams, John Calandro, and Mark Lee. Thank you so much for spending an hour of your precious time with us today. Thank you again, everybody.